The story begins with a betrayal at a family celebration. The narrator, invisible at the event, is about to take back what's hers with consequences none of them can foresee. We're introduced to a woman on the verge of reclaiming her life from those who treated her like a ghost, as her brother's success stands on the line. In a family filled with power and wealth, the narrator has always been the invisible one, the quiet sister who was kept out of the spotlight. Her brother Julian was the golden boy, charming, confident, and always in the center of attention. As a child, she had learned to fade into the background, watching as Julian took all the credit for their family's success. He was the one who could make deals, shake hands, charm investors. She was the one who worked in silence, putting in the long hours without anyone noticing, solving problems behind the scenes that no one else had the skill or patience to fix. Her parents were too busy basking in Julian's success to pay much attention to her. They thought she was just the quiet one who liked computers, who was good at fixing things when they broke. But what they didn't know, what no one in the family knew, was that she was the one who had created the very thing that made them rich. It had been her code, the intricate, brilliant design that connected the human genome to software predictions, that was the backbone of the company's valuation. The technology was hers. She had poured years of her life into building it, sacrificing sleep, sanity, and a piece of her soul. But no one saw her. No one cared. And when it came time to sell the company for $850 million there, she was standing in the corner of the room, holding an empty champagne bottle, wearing her plain black dress, unnoticed like she had always been. Her parents laughed, raising their glasses to toast the success that was about to change everything. Her brother Julian stood at the center of it all, his charm flowing freely as he celebrated their impending fortune. But she stood there, invisible, waiting for the inevitable. She had always been the reliable one, the one who made sure everything worked. But now she realized the time had come to take action. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. She simply waited for them to take a sip of their champagne, for the moment when everything they thought they owned would be turned into a disaster. Under the table, she pressed the single button on her phone. It was a small, subtle action, but it would change everything. Her brother Julian and her parents had no idea what was coming. As the glasses were raised, as the celebration reached its peak, she slipped out the glass doors into the corridor, a silent assassin ready to strike. The air outside was cold, silent. There was no rushing, no panic. She didn't run. Running looked guilty, and she wasn't guilty. She was the executioner now, and she would take what was hers. She walked down the hallway, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step purposeful, each one getting her closer to the place where she could finally make her move. Her mind was clear, her heart steady. There was no room for fear now. As she approached the server room, the place where the lifeblood of the company flowed, she pulled out the security badge Julian had forgotten to deactivate. The arrogance of her family, the way they had treated her as a pawn, had left them sloppy. Julian had stripped her of everything he could, her title, her voice, her equity, but he hadn't thought to take away her access. Her hand hovered over the badge reader, and when it beeped green, the door clicked open. Inside the room hummed with the sound of the cooling units, the heartbeat of the deal taking place down the hall. She didn't hesitate. She walked toward the main console, her fingers steady as they typed in the credentials she had held all along. The screen flickered to life, and she saw it, the code, the key that tied everything together. She wasn't there to sabotage or to destroy. She was there to take back what was hers, to stop the theft of her life's work. She knew exactly what needed to be done. With one command, she revoked access to the system. It wasn't complicated, it didn't need to be. It was just a simple, calculated move, the kind of thing she had been doing her entire life. Only now the stakes were higher than ever. The system hummed, and the status light on the drive blinked once, twice, then turned from green to red. The hum stopped. The engine that had powered her family's future was dead. She picked up the backup drive, the warm, familiar weight of it in her hand, and dropped it into her purse. Just like that, the deal was over. Her work was no longer available to be sold, to be stolen by her brother, by her parents. They thought they had everything. They thought they were invincible. But they hadn't counted on her, the one they'd ignored, the one they had underestimated. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. She looked the same, quiet, reserved, invisible. But inside, everything had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had stood there in the corner earlier, unnoticed and unheard. She was different now. She was ready to take back what was hers, to make them see her for who she really was. And she would make them pay for what they had done. Julian always knew how to charm his way into people's good graces, how to smile just right, how to speak just confidently enough to make people believe he had the world in his hands. From a young age, he had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in the eyes of everyone around him, especially in the eyes of their parents. But beneath the polished surface, Julian was something else, entirely a manipulator, a man who didn't see people, only assets. A man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, even if it meant using the very people who had made his success possible. And that was where she came in. She had always been the one in the shadows, the one who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, unnoticed and unappreciated. Her code, her work, it was the backbone of the business, the reason they had risen so far. But Julian had never cared about that. Julian didn't care about her contribution, or her future. What he cared about was himself. And when he saw an opportunity to exploit her, he took it without a second thought. The power of attorney was supposed to be a small thing, something harmless, something that would make her life easier. At least that's what Julian had told her when he asked her to sign the document when she was just 18. It was for tax purposes. He said a simple formality, something to help her manage her money better, a little piece of paperwork to keep things running smoothly. And like the trusting, naive sister she was, she believed him. She thought he was looking out for her, that he cared. She never dreamed that he would use that very signature to rob her of everything she had worked for. Julian had asked her to sign the general power of attorney with that charming smile of his, the one that always made her feel safe. He explained it away, making it seem like no big deal. She trusted him after all. He was her brother. He had always been the one who had all the answers. So, she signed. The paper was filed away and life went on. But what she didn't know then was that her brother had already set his sights on something bigger, something much darker than she could have imagined. In the months that followed, Julian had been busy behind the scenes. He had been working with the lenders, the sharks in the financial world who preyed on people like her, people who had assets, but didn't know how to protect them. Using the power of attorney she had unknowingly given him, He mortgaged her entire trust fund. He didn't go to a bank where things could be traced and scrutinized. No, he went to private equity firms, to hard money lenders who charged exorbitant interest rates, who took everything from you if you so much as missed a payment. Julian had gambled with her future, using her trust fund as collateral for a bridge loan that was supposed to fund the acquisition deal. He had used her without her knowledge, without her consent, and without a care in the world for the consequences. At first, she had no idea what had happened. She continued on, thinking everything was fine, believing that Julian was just handling the business side of things as he always did. But 2 days ago, her world had come crashing down. She'd been going through some files at the office when she stumbled upon the paperwork. The documents were hidden, tucked away in a folder under Julian's name. She had no reason to suspect anything at first, but as she started reading, her blood ran cold. The loan documents were signed with her name, her signature, her trust fund listed as collateral. And the worst part, the loan was due to be repaid once the deal closed. If the deal failed, if the acquisition fell through, Julian would leave her destitute, penniless, with nothing but a mountain of debt that she couldn't escape. Her heart sank as she realized the full extent of Julian's betrayal. He had gambled with her life, her future, her inheritance. He had leveraged everything she had ever worked for in order to secure his own success, and he had done it without a second thought. She wasn't just a sister to him anymore. She was a tool, a means to an end, a stepping stone on his path to glory. What made it worse was that Julian had been so confident, so sure of himself, that he hadn't even tried to hide it. He hadn't bothered to make sure the paperwork was discreet or the transactions were secret. He had simply assumed that she would never find out, that she would never look, that she would never question him. After all, what was she to question? She had no power, no control, no voice in the family. They had treated her like a ghost, useful only when something was broken, invisible when things were working smoothly. But now for the first time, she saw the truth. She saw the depths of his manipulation, the way he had used her trust and her loyalty against her. And she realized that if she didn't act now, if she didn't take control of the situation, she would lose everything. He had put her in a position where she had no choice but to fight back. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about her trust fund or the inheritance that had been stolen from her. It was about power, about reclaiming what had always been hers. Julian had taken her future and gambled it away for his own success. But now it was time for her to take back what was rightfully hers. She wasn't going to let him destroy her, wasn't going to let him walk away with everything while she was left with nothing. It was time for her to make a stand, to stop him before it was too late. The moment of reckoning had come. She stood in the hallway, the sound of the celebration still echoing from down the corridor, but everything felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the smug smiles of her parents and brother, it was all fading into the background as she focused on the task ahead. Her heart was steady, her mind clear. This was it. No more waiting, no more silent suffering. She wasn't the invisible sister anymore, the one who had always done the work and gotten no credit. She was done being the victim. It was time to take back control. With the deliberate steps, she moved toward the server room, the place where the power of the company flowed, where everything that had been stolen from her lived. As she walked, she thought back to the countless hours spent in front of the screen coding building, perfecting the system that had brought them all this wealth. They had taken it from her, but she had always known that it was never really theirs. It was hers. And now she was going to make sure they couldn't take it away from her. The server room doors loomed ahead, cold and sterile, their metallic surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the small security badge, the one Julian had forgotten to deactivate. A small mistake, but one that would cost him everything. She'd been invisible in the family for years, but she wasn't invisible here. She wasn't the quiet, submissive sister anymore. She wasn't the one who hid in the background while Julian took all the glory. She was the one who held the keys now. Her fingers brushed the badge reader, and the soft beep signaled that the door had unlocked. It was such a simple thing, just a brief moment of contact, but in that moment, the weight of everything she had endured pressed down on her shoulders. The betrayal, the manipulation, the years of being treated like a ghost, it all boiled down to this. She stepped inside the door, closing softly behind her as she surveyed the room. The server racks stood tall, their cool hum filling the air. The machinery that had been the backbone of the entire operation, her life's work, and now it was time to shut it all down. She approached the main console without hesitation, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The computer screen flickered to life as she typed in the admin credentials. Her hands steady her movements, precise. She didn't need to panic. She didn't need to make this complicated. It was simple. She just needed to take back what was hers. She didn't need to break the system, didn't need to destroy everything. She just needed to revoke access. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keys, typing in the command to revoke the system's master API key. A simple keystroke, a single moment of action that would change everything. She pressed enter. The screen flickered again, the command processing with a soft hum that filled the room. She watched as the status light on the main drive blinked once, twice, then shifted from green to red. The hum of the servers began to fade, the cool air of the room suddenly still. The engine that had powered their company, the one they thought was untouchable, was dead. For a brief moment, she just stood there, her gaze fixed on the screen. She hadn't made a complex virus or broken into the system. She had simply taken back control. Her work, her future, her life, they were all here. And now they were under her command once again. She wasn't just some background figure in their story. She was the one who had written the code, who had built the system, and now she was the one who had shut it all down. The backup drive was warm in her hand as she reached out and pulled it from its slot. It was small, almost insignificant in her grasp, but it held everything. Her entire life's work. The deal that had been built on the backs of her efforts. She slipped the drive into her purse, the cold weight of it against her fingers. The purse that had once been a simple accessory now felt like a weapon, a tool that would help her reclaim what had been stolen. As she turned to leave the room, the cold, sterile air of the server room brushed against her skin, but she didn't feel the chill. Inside, she was calm, focused. She had done what she came here to do. She had taken back what was hers. And as she walked back toward the conference room, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The fear that had once paralyzed her was gone. The self-doubt, the insecurity, they were gone too. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one in control. She had changed. And as she stepped into the hallway, she knew that there was no going back. The game had changed. And this time she was the one holding all the cards. The basement had always been a kind of prison, though it was dressed up as a workspace. Her parents had called it a creative environment, a place to focus without distractions, but it felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. The cold concrete walls seemed to press in on her from all sides, the air thick with the scent of dampness and stale coffee. The only light came from the harsh overhead bulbs that buzzed incessantly, casting long, unwelcoming shadows. She was cut off from the world, isolated in this underground cell, while the rest of the family lived their lives upstairs. The basement was her reality for months. No windows, no connection to the outside world. It was just her computer, and the weight of her family's expectations. Her parents, always too busy to care about anything other than the image they projected, had turned a blind eye to what was happening down here. They had stripped her of everything, her freedom, her social life, even her sense of self. But most of all, they had stripped her of her humanity. To them, she was nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. And then there was Julian. He was the one who had orchestrated this. He had made sure that she was locked away out of sight and out of mind. He had convinced their parents that it was for her own good, that she needed to be protected from distractions. But the truth was darker. Julian had made her invisible. He had stripped away her value, turning her into little more than a worker bee who could code but couldn't speak, couldn't connect with anyone. He had made it clear that her only purpose was to serve his ambitions. It wasn't just the isolation that broke her. It was the constant erosion of her sense of self-worth. The subtle, insidious way Julian would remind her of her place. He would come down to the basement drunk on his own sense of superiority and look at her like she was nothing more than a machine. He would make little comments as if he was reminding her of her role in the family. He would watch her type away at the code, making her feel like she was performing for him, like she was a zoo animal in a cage. The worst night was when Julian came down to the basement, clearly agitated. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs echoed through the quiet space. She could hear him before she saw him, the way he fumbled with his tie, clearly drunk. He had been at some party upstairs, surrounded by people who adored him, people who fed into his ego. And there she was, in her basement, alone with her code. "You look like a corpse," he said, as he walked into the room, his voice slurred. He was smiling, but there was no warmth in it. It was the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. He circled around her as if inspecting his work, his eyes flicking to the screen, but not to her. "You haven't slept in 3 days, and you still can't get it right. The architecture is collapsing, Celera. You're useless." Her throat tightened, the sting of his words like ice, but she didn't respond. She never did. There was no point in arguing. Nothing she said ever mattered. He had made sure of that. The longer she sat there, the more she felt her will breaking. She had always tried to please them, tried to prove her worth, but every attempt seemed to fall flat. Every sacrifice was met with indifference. It was like trying to climb a mountain that kept getting steeper until she couldn't even see the peak anymore. Julian's face loomed over her, his hand grabbing her chin, forcing her to look up at him. "You don't need time, Celera," he hissed, his fingers digging into her jaw. "You need gratitude. You should be thanking us for giving your pathetic little life a purpose. We found a way to make you useful. You're lucky you even have a place here." His grip tightened, and she fought the urge to pull away. The words were like poison, but there was no escape. He had already won. He had already stripped her of everything she had, everything that made her feel like a person. The only thing left was the work, the endless work that had become her identity. But it wasn't enough, not anymore. That night, as Julian left her in the basement, the door clicking shut behind him, something inside her snapped. She had spent so long trying to please them, trying to meet their impossible expectations. She had spent so long believing that if she just worked harder, if she just gave more of herself, they would finally see her, finally appreciate her. But the truth was that they never would. They didn't care about her. They cared about the product, the code, the money she could make them. She wasn't a person to them. She was just a tool. That was when she made the decision to stop trying. She couldn't please them. She couldn't make them love her. All she could do now was take back what was hers. It wasn't just about the code anymore. It was about reclaiming herself, her power, her identity. She wasn't going to let Julian or anyone else define her anymore. She had given them enough. It was time to take control, to stop being the invisible sister, the quiet, submissive worker. It was time to become the woman she had always been beneath the surface, the one who would take back her life, no matter what it cost. The moment she stepped toward the conference room, the weight of what she had done, what she was about to do, settled over her like a storm cloud. Every step felt heavy, each one a reminder that the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about taking back control anymore. This was the final confrontation, the moment where everything would either collapse in on itself or fall into place. Julian had no idea what was coming. To him, she was still the quiet, submissive sister who would stand in the shadows and serve his needs. But the game had changed, and he didn't even see it. Her fingers clenched around the handle of the purse, feeling the backup drive inside like the weight of her own revenge. The conference room was just ahead, the glass walls reflecting the polished professionalism of a deal that had once seemed unstoppable, but there was no turning back now. As she rounded the corner, she saw him. Julian was standing by the door, pacing, his expression tight with anxiety. He hadn't noticed her approach, his back turned as he muttered to himself, probably rehearsing the lies he was about to tell. And then he stopped. His eyes locked onto hers as she stepped into the room, the cold realization spreading across his face. For a moment there was silence, as if the air itself had frozen in place. He was sweating the confident facade that had carried him through so many deals, slipping away under the pressure. He could sense something was wrong, but he couldn't quite figure out what. He was desperate now, desperate to save face in front of the investors, to salvage the deal that was about to slip through his fingers. "Where have you been?" Julian hissed, his voice low, almost pleading. His fingers dug into her arm, but she didn't flinch. There was no more fear. There was only purpose. "I was getting ice," she replied flatly, her voice steady like she had nothing to lose. "Like you asked." His grip tightened and his breath was heavy with the stink of alcohol and desperation. He pulled her closer, his face inches from hers. "Listen to me," he whispered, his words soaked in venom. "You don't know what you're doing. If you embarrass me now..." But she was already walking past him, her steps unyielding. She didn't need to hear his threats anymore. She was done being scared of him. As she moved toward the screen, she could feel his eyes burning into her back, but she didn't look back. The investors, The sharks who had been circling this deal like vultures sat silently at the table, their eyes fixed on Julian, waiting for the demo to begin. The moment Julian hit the big green button, the screen flickered to life. It was supposed to be seamless, flawless, the grand finale that would secure the deal. But instead of the smooth data flow they were expecting, the system froze. The progress bar stalled at 33%, its perfect trajectory abruptly halted. The fans in the laptop hummed louder, spinning frantically, and the temperature in the room seemed to rise. Julian's fingers tapped wildly on the keyboard, his confidence shattering with each failed attempt. The truth began to bleed through the cracks of his polished performance. The system was down. The API key, the one that had been Julian's lifeline, had been revoked. Her command had taken effect, and now his empire was crumbling in front of everyone. The investors looked at each other, confused at first, then suspicious. Julian's face was a study in panic, his composure gone, replaced with pure, unfiltered fear. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising, but it was too late. The truth was already on the screen, and there was no escaping it. For a moment, Julian stood frozen, trapped in the glare of the red letters on the screen. His mask had shattered, and the room was filled with a heavy silence of realization. It was his downfall the moment he was exposed for the fraud he had been all along. And as she watched him standing there, unraveling in front of everyone, she couldn't help but feel the smallest spark of satisfaction. This was it. The moment of victory, not just for her, but for everything she had worked for. For the years of silence, the years of being invisible, the years of watching him take what was hers. It was all coming to an end now, and she was the one holding the power. The doors to the conference room swung open, and the cold, sterile air rushed past her as she walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of everything her family had built. She didn't look back. Julian's desperate voice echoed in her mind, but it no longer held any power over her. She was done. She had taken back what was hers, and now the consequences were unfolding around her like a slow-motion crash. As she stepped into the hallway, the chaos from the conference room was already spilling out. Julian was trapped. His lies exposed his empire, crumbling under the weight of his greed and arrogance. The investors were already on the phone, their voices low but urgent as they pulled away from the deal. Her parents, sitting in the back of the room, were staring at her with a mixture of shock and disbelief. They hadn't seen it coming. None of them had. They had underestimated her thought. She was just a quiet, invisible cog in their machine. But now they would see her for who she truly was. She didn't feel a rush of victory, not exactly. There was no triumphant cheer, no sense of celebration. It was a hollow feeling, the kind that only comes when you've had to fight for something that should have been yours from the beginning. The price of freedom was steep years of isolation, years of being overlooked, years of suffering in silence. But in the end, it had been worth it. She had taken control of her own future, and that was something no one could ever take away from her. She reached the exit, her hand on the door handle, and paused for a moment. Outside, the world was waiting. It was a strange feeling knowing that everything was about to change. She was no longer just the silent sister, the one who worked in the background. She was someone different now. She had fought for her life, and now she could begin again, free from the shackles her family had placed on her. As the door opened, she stepped outside into the cool evening air. The weight of the backup drive in her purse was a reminder of everything she had accomplished, but it was also a reminder of everything she had lost. In that moment, she understood that freedom came at a cost. It was bittersweet, but it was hers. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat watching this story unfold, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The journey to reclaim what's yours isn't always easy, but sometimes taking control is the only way forward. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story is far from over.